Hi, friends, and welcome back. Today I'm going to be taking our episode in a little bit unique direction. I've spent a long weekend in my hidey hole here at home taking in the Globe Sound Healing Conference, which is put on by a sound healing school out in the Bay Area. And it was 5 days that were packed full of presenters from all different aspects of sound healing. Anything from people that are doing sound baths to people that are doing original research. Now, I talk a lot about my experience as a holistic health specialist, but what a lot of you may not know is that I also have very formal training in Western music. I actually have a doctorate in voice performance and have spent most of my life learning classical music, performing classical music, leading worship, those types of things. And so when I learned about sound healing, I got really curious about it because it felt like a way to tie all of the different areas that I work in together in one cohesive whole. And I had a really profound experience with a sound bath down at the Integratron in California this last winter. It really shifted a lot of things for me in the way that I was thinking at that time, and it helped open me up to some creative possibilities that had seemed too big to tackle. It did the same thing for my husband. In fact, I would say that the effects for him were extremely amplified. And it's been incredible to see what's been able to unfold in both of our lives since that one sound bath that we experienced. So when I had the opportunity to get some training in this about a month ago from my mentor Zakaya, he has a school that is for sound healers, and he takes you through the process, intro to sound healing, step by step, everything you need to know, everything about the nature of consciousness and how that plays into sound. And so that was really my introduction into sound healing. And that's going to be something I'm going to be bringing into my practice in the apothecary. But then I had the opportunity to attend this conference, and this was such an interesting experience for me because as a musician, I already knew a lot about acoustics and how sound works and the overtone series and different types of instruments and world music, as we used to call it, all different types of things I have had some background and training in. But I have to say that I was very humbled to learn all that I did not know about sound. Now, there's a difference between sound and music. Music is organized sound, and that is mostly what I've worked in for most of my life. Whereas sound healing is not necessarily focused on organizing sound into a musical structure. It is focused on organizing sound for the sound itself, for the frequencies itself. And the other thing that I was really stunned to learn from this conference is how much original scientific research is going on in the field of sound and in the fields of sound healing from a lot of different standpoints and perspectives. So today I wanted to share with you some of my top 3 things that were my biggest takeaways from the Sound Healing Conference, because I feel like the realization of these things is already enriching my life, and I want to be able to pass that along to you. And also, as I open things up more for sound healing in my practice, I want to be able to share with you that there is actually scientific evidence about how this works, but that there is at the same time other ways of knowing, and that by using sound, we really very comprehensively touch all of who we are as humans and within creation. So, the first thing I want to share with you today is that it seems from a scientific perspective that sound is actually the structure of the universe, and it is what structure arises from in the universe. Now, this was so fascinating for me to learn. I know a fair amount about quantum physics from a layman's standpoint, and I knew about a lot of things about how matter interacts with itself and seems to have self knowledge, but I did not really understand from a scientific standpoint how everything truly is frequency. Everything truly is sound. Everything is giving off a frequency at all times. As human beings, our range of frequency that we can hear is limited, so we can hear about 10 octaves of sound, but there's a lot of sound that is lower frequency than that, and there's a lot of sound that is higher frequency than that. And if you've ever seen those sound spectrums where it shows you sound like gamma, X-ray, those types of things, That is what I'm talking about, is that everything has a frequency. These frequencies can be measured. They're used by scientists all the time. In fact, that is a lot of how astronomy is performed, is by listening to the frequencies of the heavenly bodies to learn what they're made of, what they're doing, how they're moving, and so on and so forth. That's fascinating to know. This is fascinating to me, especially from a spiritual standpoint, because in my faith tradition, we talk about how God spoke and everything was created. I thought that that was just a Christian belief. I'd never really heard that anywhere else. And I learned through this conference that there's actually a lot of cultures around the world that share that belief. A lot of religions or indigenous beliefs that contain the idea that in some way sound was the initiator of what we come to understand as our reality. That alone was mind-blowing to me. And then I think it's also interesting from a scientific standpoint that we have this thing called the Big Bang. And I mean, that is a description of a sound. So if you think about it, both from a spiritual standpoint and from a scientific standpoint, we're already kind of acknowledging this without really understanding the fullness of what we're saying when we say that. So there's this thing called cymatics. And you can see the shapes of frequencies through something called a cymoscope. So a cymoscope is a device that creates different frequencies, and over the top of this device they stretch some kind of a membrane, or they have some kind of a platform, and on that they put sand or some kind of a sandy material, and then they pump different frequencies through the cymoscope. And as the different frequencies are occurring, you can see that every single specific frequency creates a very specific shape that corresponds to that frequency. It just naturally, this shape, this organization of matter naturally arises out of the frequency itself, which is so cool. The lower the frequency, the less complex the shape created. The higher the frequency, the more complex the shape that is created. Now, from those shapes, we get things like sacred geometry. We can see the beginnings of the mathematical relationships that explain things like the pi ratio, the phi ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, if you're familiar with any of those types of principles. The things that Pythagoras and Socrates and Plato were talking about in their investigation of what is reality, we're finding, yeah, they were kind of right. And when you take those shapes that the cymoscope creates, you get sacred geometries, and from those we get the Platonic solids. This is a very, very complex discussion that I'm trying to boil down to into a very simple way to understand. But what I want you to know is that these shapes that arise from the frequency are the same shapes that organize all of matter. It's how atoms are, the shapes that atoms are arranged in, that elements are arranged in. It's the shape that our cells form in when we're first being formed in the womb. It's the way our ear is shaped. It's everything in the universe. As above, so below is actually true. And these frequencies are what are creating the shapes that all matter organizes itself from. It's totally, totally, totally mind-blowing. Now, from a physical standpoint, we are an electric machine. We create frequency, we create energy, we have an electric current running through our body, which then creates a magnetic field. All of these things also come from the same organizing principles of the shapes that are arising from the frequencies in the body. We have a torus field around us that can be measured. If you're familiar with HeartMath, the HeartMath Institute, they've actually been able to study very deeply into the heart brain. You actually have three hearts. You actually have three brains in your body. You have your brain, you have the brain that's in your heart, and you have the gut brain. And they've been doing a lot of study into the heart, and they have discovered a measurable torus field, which is like a kind of like a donut shaped field of energy that is around every living being. Human is mostly what I'm focusing on here. And as our frequency, as our emotions shift, as different things arise in our body, as illnesses manifest, the frequency that we produce, that we're giving off, shifts and changes. This can be measured in our field and it can be felt by others. So that's the first point. That's a lot to unpack. That's like a lifetime's worth of brain candy for me, is just thinking about how frequency and sound really are the underlying principles of the universe. Okay, so the second thing that I want to talk about is the body's response to sound. I knew some of this from personal experience, but I really did not understand the depth of what there is here to explore in terms of physical response. So, and it's not just physical, there's three areas that are affected by sound, two of which we can very objectively measure. So there's our physical body, there's our mental body, in other words, our brain, and then there's a spiritual response. And so talking about the different things that are potentials of using sound within the body. First of all, there's a concept called entrainment, and this is a really interesting subject to look into. There's ways to understand entrainment if you have ever experienced a sympathetic resonance before. Fastest example I can give of this is that you're in your home and a big truck drives by and all of a sudden the windows are rattling in your house, or there's something shaking in your house. The frequency that that truck is giving off is the same frequency of that object that's vibrating. They're in sympathetic resonance. The exact same thing happens with any stronger frequency to any weaker frequency. Whatever the stronger frequency is, it will entrain the second object with the weaker frequency to its frequency. This is just a scientific fact. It's also an interpersonal fact. So if you've ever experienced the phenomenon of someone coming in the room and they just have the most joyous, calm, peaceful energy, you feel at rest in their presence, they have a depth to them that is comforting. You have been entrained to that person's state. You have been entrained to their frequency. You are now resonating in their frequency because their frequency is stronger. Same thing can happen with the negative emotions. Somebody walks in a room and you can immediately tell that they're on edge, or they're angry, or they're frustrated. You're picking up on their frequency. And there's actually physical structures in your body that do this. This blew my mind. So on all of your cell membranes, there's these little things that look like antennas, and on those antennas are microtubules. Those microtubules are meant for receiving information and also transmitting information. So those microtubules are the things that pick up on when somebody's staring at you that you can't even see. Like if somebody were staring at me behind me and I couldn't see them, but I could feel it. That's the microtubules. The microtubules are very, very sensitive to any change in sound. Sound is pressure. They're also, because of what they are, they're not limited to the audible sounds. They're able to pick up on all different frequencies because remember, everything is frequency, everything is sound. So those microtubules are the ones that they think are responsible in part for our gut instinct on things and picking up on vibes, but they also react in a very physical way to different types of sound. And when the body experiences sound, especially audible sound, but this would go beyond audible sound, it experiences it as pressure, and the body picks up on that pressure, and it can be used for a lot of different things. It can be used for clearing congestion. It can be used for stimulating a healing response in your cell. It helps to upregulate your mitochondria. One thing that I think is really interesting is how sound is being used in pain relief. So you can take and you can strike a tuning fork, and that tuning fork can be applied to different painful areas in the body. The pressure from the sound stimulates a healing response in the cell, and it also stimulates the brain to release its own natural opioids. Amazing, 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 amazing. Another thing that happens when you experience pain, like say you stub your toe or something like that, you usually make sound when you do that. They find that releasing the sound out of your voice actually helps to stimulate more of that natural opioid release. So the next time you stub your toe, just let it out. You'll feel better. Stress management. This is a really wonderful aspect of sound healing. So when we experience the sound of something that creates a sense of coherence. So here I have a quartz crystal bowl that I'm playing. And I invite you just to focus on that sound. In your mind, I want you to think that you're almost becoming that sound. Allow that sound to go into your body. Allow it, imagine it as if it can go in, can release any tense areas, remove any congested areas, energize any deficient areas. And as you're doing that, I want you to notice, are you feeling less stressed? Are you feeling perhaps more harmonious within yourself? So sound, just sound itself, when it's used intentionally in this way, it allows us to come to a place of deep stillness and spaciousness within ourselves. And it actually allows our body to go to a very, very, very deep state of rest and nourishment. So this is like your rest and digest response amplified exponentially. It also has the ability to change our brainwaves to different brainwaves. So this is now the mental side of effects of sound. This type of sound, other types of sound, have the ability to change how the brain is functioning. So this type of sound from the crystal bowl, it's very, very clear. It's going to help to bring out a sense of focus for people. You can hear that there's not very much dissonance there. It can help to bring a calm state of mind that allows you to hear your inner voice. But there are other sounds, such as from gongs or Tibetan bowls, sounds that sound like all of the sounds, that sound like the universe, that maybe even sound out of tune. These sounds, they can do brain scans to our response by putting different electrodes on the skull, and they can measure what's happening in different areas of the brain, the frontal cortex, the amygdala, so on and so forth, what's happening in the reptile brain way back here. And when we listen to sounds that are like a gong or a Tibetan bowl, it actually shuts down the whole brain, and not in a bad way. It brings the whole brain into a very parasympathetic response where it goes into a deep, 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 deep rest. Meaning, those types of sounds can turn off your monkey mind. So if you're a person that really struggles with racing thoughts, with not being able to calm yourself down, those types of sounds could be very, very therapeutic for you. But really, for any of us, I think we all struggle with that on some level, and some level. But really, any type of sound therapy has the potential to bring your body, your mind, and your spirit into a deep, deep state of nourishment and rest that is unique to any kind of therapy that I personally am aware. And I have tried a lot of different holistic therapies. So that is about the body's response to sound. And there's so much more there. I mean, there's so much more to still be explored. They believe that we will get to some point in medicine where they will be able to find the frequency of cancer cells and feed that same frequency back into the cancer cells to cause them to explode, self-destruct, implode, however you want to think about that. So there's a lot more potentiality here for all humanity in terms of sound healing that is not in the woo-woo category at all, but that is very practical. And things like ultrasound are already being used. That's sound medicine, but there's more to be explored there too. So the third thing that I want to talk about is the power of the voice. And this was a little triggering for me personally because as a classical musician that has a doctorate in voice performance, I have learned the quote unquote right and wrong ways to use my voice, and that certain ways of using my voice are going to be dangerous or damaging. And then there's all of the things that come in when your body is your instrument, and that if you're not making the sounds that you intend or that are expected for the music that you're performing, then you are a failure and your sense of self-worth is tied up in that. So I think that for me, I've become very inhibited in my voice. And the sessions of this conference that were about the power of the voice was all about exploring in a very playful, childlike way how to use your voice again. And the truth of the matter is that so many of us have been told that we can't sing, that we shouldn't be musicians, and how many of us have been told not to speak our truth or express ourselves for one reason or another, either now in our adult lives or as kids. For me, I was told all the time that I was bossy, that I shouldn't be bossy. And even now in my early 40s, I'm realizing how much of myself I've held back, some in healthy ways, but a lot in unhealthy ways in terms of how I show up, because I've been trying to suppress my voice, my truth, my self-expression. And what they find is that when you don't get to express yourself, your nervous system hangs on to the thing that you need to express. So if you need to express grief, but you're not expressing it vocally, you are essentially holding it inside in a true physical way. That becomes a layer of stuck stuff in your nervous system. Also in your fascia. Your fascia is the tissue that kind of holds your body together, and that holds memory as well. They're finding that the fascia holds memories of trauma, all kinds of things. And what the vocal therapists find is that when we learn to speak our voice again, even if it's just making random sounds like bleh or ah, or whatever we want to do to express our feelings, it helps to release a lot of that stored and stuck trauma. And the more we can explore that, the more we can find that it's easier and easier and easier to be able to speak our truth and express ourselves again. And there's layers of health that become restored through doing this. And so how does it work? For one thing, the vagus nerve alone is part of what's getting stimulated when we use our voice, and it's from a couple of different angles. So the vagus nerve, vagus means wandering. I always thought the vagus nerve was just like one nerve that went from the top of the spinal column through the digestive system and to the bottom. Not so. It wanders literally all over the place in the body. It's kind of crazy. It's intertwined around everything. It's like a web. And when we are using our voice, especially when we're humming or we're doing a belting sort of sound, like a loud ah sort of sound, we are directly vibrating the vagus nerve that's going through the neck and throat area right here. But also the deep breathing that we need for singing, for hollering, for yelling, for self-expression in any way. When we are getting out of the shallow breathing, which causes a stress response, and we're getting into a deeper breathing, the vagus nerve is actually registering that as a rest and digest signal and allows our body to go into less of a stressed state. Isn't that fascinating? And isn't it fascinating that whether we're talking about in the West or the East or indigenous cultures, most traditional cultures have a place where there's community that comes together for self-expression, worship, and sound making. And this is something that is being lost in our culture. we no longer create community for people to be heard. And we no longer come together for times of worship or self-expression where we're all using our voices together. And what's interesting is when we come together in worship, that entrainment thing happens. When we come together for self-expression, that entrainment thing happens. When you're listening to sound or you are participating in the sound, your heart starts to beat at the same rate as everyone around you. Your brain waves start to synchronize. It's a really, really powerful way of deepening and creating that community that is becoming lost. And in the process of that, we are forgetting how to use our voices to even make silly sounds. So one of the therapists that spoke, her name is Vicki Dodd. She's like incredible, a pioneer in the sound healing field, talked about making the sound of your feeling. And this is something we do as kids until we get inhibited and we're told not to make silly noises or we're told not to express our feelings. So if you just think of the feeling of frustration and you're like, okay, I'm going to make the sound of that, just know that there's no right sound. There's no wrong sound. Just make your sound. So sound of frustration, whatever that is. When you actually allow your voice to make that sound, you are creating an emotional release for yourself where you're not hanging on to that emotion and imprinting it into your body in any way. You're getting yourself into that rest and digest. So it's really important to express those feelings to yourself. Make the sounds that you need to make about your feelings. And you can actually turn your body into a lab, as Vicki Dodd talks about. And before you make your sounds, just check in and see, okay, where do I feel like I'm holding this feeling in my body? Where do I notice it? Where do I feel it? Where is my tension? Where am I feeling pain? Where am I feeling uncomfortable? Where am I feeling good? Then make your sounds and then go and do a body scan again and see if you notice any difference. So I have been playing with this, using my body as a lab, and I have been shocked. How fast this works, how much better I feel when I make the sounds of my feelings. And then she also allows you to learn to direct your sound to different places in your body that you're feeling. So maybe like right now in my lower back, I'm feeling tight and I'm feeling stuck. So what if I made the sound of feeling tight and stuck in my lower back? It might be, and I just direct that sound to my lower back. I'm telling you guys, it's like within a minute, that sensation that I'm having in my body will be greatly diminished, if not completely gone. So if you take anything away from this podcast today in terms of how to live a more holistic lifestyle with ease, my advice would be to know that sound works. It's very powerful. It is truly the foundational structure of the universe. And so because of that, we can use it intentionally to express ourselves and to start feeling into and releasing our emotions simply by using our voice again. So those are my 3 things I wanted to share with you from the Globe Sound Healing Conference. The sound is the structure of the universe. The body has physical, mental, and spiritual responses to sound that can be measured, and the power of your own voice to use your own sounds to heal your own body. It's incredible. So thank you for joining me today. If you liked this, I would love to have you share, comment, like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell. And if you're listening on your podcast app, please give me a 5-star review, and I will see you next time.